Hey there guys, we're back again with another book, sort of. This is the sample first chapter for a book that is currently being written called Split Personality. And as usual, I've just got to do the old copyright. So Chaos Nova and Split Personality are all copyright 2006 to David Noe. Um, And just a little bit of background on this one quickly. This story is about two Reclaimer assassins. They've been exiled from their race, and Reclaimers are basically a race of people within the universe of Chaos Nova that we've created. So I'll just start. Chapter 1, Downfall. Artificial rain hit the windscreen of the rented speeder as it made its way through the seemingly deserted Ar-Kaos industrial complex towards its target. It was the early hours of the morning as the vehicle pulled up to the litter-covered curb and paused long enough to let its passengers out onto the street. Two hooded figures quietly stepped out into the poorly lit night of Ar-Kaos, taking in the almost viscous stench that filled the air. As soon as the doors slid back into place, the speeder turned about 90 degrees on the spot before pulling away onto the opposite side of the road. Seconds later, and it had disappeared back into the darkness. The passengers glanced at each other through thin veils. After a quick nod to one another, the pair turned and began walking towards the end of the street. The hooded cloaks they wore seemed to help them blend into the shadows while also keeping them dry. They kept aware of their surroundings, freezing as the occasional vehicle or security droid flew past. They eventually came to a stop outside a huge pair of rusted gates. A sharp-toned female voice came from under one of the hoods, clearly that of a reclaimer. "This is it." The other figure reluctantly nodded. The sturdy metal panels stood like a rusting Goliath in the high-rise complex. Luckily, the lock wasn't as sturdy as the gate itself, and after utilising an automatic lockpick coupled with some brute force, the pair had crept inside. The hinges made a loud groaning as the gate swung back. One of the hooded figures grabbed it before it slammed and relaxed it back into place. They both audibly gave off a sigh of relief before making their way around to the edge of the main building. For a second, the glint of near-perfect diamond eyes reflected from beneath one of the thin veils against the lights of a passing vehicle. They were all that could be seen between the combined cover of darkness and rain. Another vehicle passed before the area was finally clear. Silently the pair made their way over to one of the facility's doors and crept inside. The corridor that the pair emerged into was as dark as the night sky. After a few seconds their eyes adjusted to the poor lighting, and for the first time since the job had begun, they lowered their veiled hoods. Both were Reclaimer women. They had beautiful, jewel-like eyes that seemed to pierce even the darkness. The slightly shorter of the two, Luna Aleph, had bright diamond eyes, wide with intrigue and hungry for knowledge. Light blonde hair framed her petite round face with some tied back in a ponytail. A thin black line, almost like lightning, ran across her face underneath both eyes, a common marking of the Reclaimer race. The sharper and darker the tattoos were, the more powerful the abilities. As her hood came to rest, the handles for two highly decorated swords were revealed, strapped tightly to her back. Luna unsheathed one silently in preparation for the next step in their task. The weapon looked steady in her hand, although thanks to her almost childish features, didn't seem to suit her. Her face did little to betray a real determination. Luna looked over to her companion, a fellow exiled reclaimer who had taken the name Rogue Savannah. She had a much deeper olive complexion and short, thick dark brown hair. Her eyes were almost black, comparable to onyx, and shared the same piercing stare as her friend. Rogue looked much more determined, her eyes portraying an almost evil glare. Her markings were sharper too, more erratic, like barbed spikes crisscrossing her left cheek and ears. Rogue had decided to unsheath two of her blades with the same silent professionalism as her friend, although looking much more deadly. The sharpness in her eyes showed a willingness to kill. Rogue and Luna were Reclaimer assassins, working on behalf of an organisation that even they didn't know the name of. They did know, however, that it would have been very difficult for them to find work elsewhere with their exile status. Neither was ready to complain either, especially while the pay was as satisfactory as it was. The corridor would have been silent had it not been for the ventilation systems occasionally blowing fresh air into the complex. The pair moved silently. The hallway was poorly protected, but as they drew closer to the officers' quarters, it became clear this mission wasn't going to go as smoothly as they had hoped. Two well-armoured guards were guarding the entryway to the next area. One was sat eating questionable content from a labelless can, while the other paced back and forth just outside the door. From behind the safety of one of the building's many corners, the Reclaimers planned their next move. Luna had her eyes closed and was trying to feel out the soldiers' intentions using her gifts. Even though she was whispering, her voice sounded melodic, almost song-like as she spoke. Her tone soft, possibly caring, and completely unlike the usual spite-laced tongue of her fellow Reclaimers. One is drunk, confident. The other is hard to read. Rogue nodded. Looks like only one is wearing an earpiece. We'll take him first. Luna nodded in agreement and gripped the handle of her sword with a renewed purpose. Rogue decided it best to resheath one of her weapons, moving to favour a much smaller throwing knife. It was her last one, and she had developed a habit of picking it up again after kills. They each took a deep breath before erupting behind cover. Luna made her way round to one side of the corridor, whilst Rogue's knife buried itself in the guard's earpiece as he turned. His fellow doorman made to react, but found himself sliding down Luna's sword as quickly as he jumped up, painting it with the blood now flowing and bubbling from his neck. After she was sure he was dead, Luna planted her boot on his chest and withdrew the sword from his throat. The body slumped backwards in the chair, arms hanging down in a similar fashion to his head. She then turned to Rogue with a firm nod as her companion pulled her knife free. Before long, they had moved closer to the door. A keypad lay to one side. The panel that housed it was also significantly reinforced to prevent hacking. Luckily, the pair had been given some surprise intel shortly before the job had started, making their lives a little easier. It had been obvious in the weeks leading up to the task that their target was largely disliked by a powerful group of Reclaimer Council members, and as such, more funding had been put into this assassination effort. Rogue wasted little time keying in the correct numbers. A few seconds later, and they were stepping into the corridor of the sleeping quarters, a quiet smile on both their faces. Their steps remained silent as ever as they made their way around the plant boxes and benches placed throughout the area to make it look more welcoming. Luna noted that a spot of paint wouldn't have gone amiss even in the darkness. They eventually came to a door marked with the target's name. Their 5 gods were smiling on the pair tonight as they tried the handle to find the door was unlocked. Rogue looked to her companion before they crouch-stepped their way inside, both now wielding 2 blades each. 2 beds were laid out at opposite ends of the room. Rogue made her way to one while Luna headed for the other. The room itself was almost pitch black, their only saving grace being their slightly attuned sense of feeling other people's presences. A slightly muffled grunt, coupled with a swift twitch, signalled that the non-essential had been dealt with. With that completed, Luna made her way over to the actual target, settling herself on the opposite side of the bed to Rogue. All 4 of their blades neatly formed a circle around the man's neck before Rogue nudged him awake. He stirred slowly at first, but soon shook it off. His eyes widened at the situation. "I had a feeling you might drop by." Something in his statement made Luna feel uneasy. Her senses were picking up on all kinds of emotions. Usually when they killed someone, it was usual to feel a plethora of different emotions, mainly fear or anger, but their latest mark also seemed to be quite deceitful, like he was hiding something of great importance to the pair. Rogue began the well-practiced monologue that was custom of all good Reclaimer assassins before killing a target. "We are here because someone has taken out a contract on your life. By universal law, we are not only permitted to fulfill this contract, but obliged to in order to maintain the balance. By any means necessary..." By universal law, we are not only permitted to fulfill this contract, but obliged to in order to maintain the balance. By any means necessary. The contract selection system is very thorough and will only accept contracts if the reason behind the requests are deemed worthy. The man looked confused, almost angry as he interrupted. "You should know you can't kill me. Not properly, anyway." Luna reinforced her firmness with the blades as she replied, "Don't drag this out. It won't be pleasant." Rogue continued, slightly sharper now with her words. "May the 5 have mercy on your soul. We hope you return to this reality as a more constructive member of the Reclaimer universe." She paused and refocused her eyes on him. "Do you have any last words?" The defeat was obvious in his eyes, but the defiance was still there. "Not really. But you should know that as soon as I die, a signal will be sent to a facility far, far away from here, whereupon they will download my personality into a machine capable of killing the pair of you without hesitation." He pushed his throat into the blades. "Mark my words, Reclaimers, you haven't seen the last of me." As his head rolled away from his body, Luna and Rogue crept out the door and back into the corridor. They paid little heed to pre-death threats, especially ones so extreme, and while Luna had indeed detected some deception, she couldn't be sure whether it was of that or something else. It didn't take long for them to reach the main door to the officers' section, but now there was a problem. A small group of guards were gathered, looking over the bodies of the doormen the Reclaimers had killed earlier. A well-dressed officer was giving orders to a much younger, eager-eyed soldier before the young boy ran off into the maze of corridors. "We don't have time for this," Rogue suggested as she resheathed one of her blades and made for her knife again. Her forefinger rested on the blade as she held it tightly in the palm of her hand, eyeing up her best possible first target. Luna was crouched behind a plant box near her companion. Her eyes closed again as she focused. The door to the officers' section slowly hissed off to one side before the small squad stepped inside. Most looked to be armed with standard RX-10 assault rifles, common for most security forces on Ar-Kaos. Their armour also looked to be of the usual issue, with logos painted on carelessly. As they fanned out into the room, Rogue steadied herself with a deep breath. One soldier was making his way cautiously towards her with steady progress. Luna had opened her eyes again. She stilled herself for a second before jumping up onto her feet and slicing at the soldier. He barely saw it coming as his life was cut short. Luna gave his still standing corpse a sharp kick in Rogue's direction as the rest of the squad realised what was happening. The younger soldier had also completed his task as the alarm rang out throughout the complex. Rogue threw her knife towards one of the other squad members before grabbing the one Luna had killed. She caught him almost gracefully before spinning him round and raising his gun. Unluckily, her knife had missed its mark and buried itself in the door behind him. Luckily, however, she now had a fully automatic rifle. She began firing sporadic bursts as Luna moved up and began dancing between the soldiers, slicing and cutting almost gracefully. Rogue took a spray of return bullets to her chest that sent her stumbling backwards. She was stunned, but mostly uninjured thanks to a now destroyed layer of armour. To add to their problems, officers had begun pouring out of the corridors behind them. Rogue had to make a choice. She grabbed the RX-10 slung around her human shield's neck before pushing him into the squad Luna was slowly dealing with. The rifle came loose and found its way into a freshly woken officer's nose before Rogue pulled it back and fired the final rounds, killing or injuring most of the unarmed officers. She dropped the rifle and unsheathed her sword almost in the same motion before making her way over to Luna, who seemed to have taken a hit to the arm. Upon noticing it, Rogue seemed to share the pain. A sharp stabbing ran through her arm in a similar spot. With renewed anger, Rogue stepped forward. Several slices later and the pair were making for the door. The alarm was still blaring loudly as Rogue pulled her knife out of the wall and pocketed it. Seconds later she grabbed at one of the downed soldiers' rifles before following Luna out. Resistance was thin throughout the complex as they made their way back to the door they'd used to enter. Luna grabbed it, pulling it open with a good arm before Rogue slammed it shut again instantly. There had been close to an army waiting for them in the courtyard. The Reclaimer jammed the rifle under the handle before turning to Luna. "You didn't sense that?" Luna shook her head. "I'm a little distracted. We won't be earning anything if we walk into shit like that. Come on, we need to find another way out." Hammer-strength blows began registering against the door as the pair disappeared back into the complex. "We need to go up," Rogue stated, almost coldly. Luna nodded. Aware that her mistake could have got them killed, she followed her companion up the corridor towards the complex's only elevator. It took them a few seconds to pry the doors apart before they made their way up the shaft. They were holding on to one another and stepping up the walls. It was their only option since the elevator seemed to be hover-based, leaving the pair little rope or steel cord to climb up. Eventually they made it to the roof. Before bursting out this time, Rogue made sure Luna had checked the area. It was clear enough. They raised their hoods once again, completely shadowing their faces before stepping out into the rain. They seemed to nearly vanish against the darkness of the rooftop while they made their way towards the edge. The complex looked like a layered pyramid. They could slide down and land on The complex looked like a layered pyramid. They could slide down and land on one of the many walkways if they had so chosen. However, Rogue had other ideas. "We can slide most of the way down, jump the fence, and run." Luna replied quickly. "Sounds almost too easy." Her eyes were focusing on a small group of guards that had run into view. At the same instant, the door to the roof burst open behind them, followed by a hail of gunfire. Rogue grabbed Luna, pulled her to the edge, and jumped. The ride down hadn't been as bad as Rogue had imagined. The occasional bullet bounced off the building around them as they made the ever-speeding descent to the floor. They jumped before they hit the ground, spinning with their swords turned outwards, slicing through anyone between them and the fence they had now latched onto. They resheathed their weapons, threw themselves over the fence, and disappeared into the night. Later that day, as the sun began to rise, Luna and Rogue had found themselves in civilian clothing, sat at one of the many cafes in one of the busiest spaceports in known space. Luna was wearing a plain cream-coloured dress, while her almost white blonde hair flowed behind her ears towards the floor. Had it been any longer, and it would have touched the ground as she sat enjoying a warm drink. Rogue had opted for a darker wardrobe as to blend in with the other travellers easier. Among the backdrop of refugees and workers, her clothes would seem dirty unless inspected closer. A quiet beep rang out from Luna's carryall. Rogue glanced at her with almost keen eyes. "Next job already? We really must be climbing the ranks." As Luna pulled her datapad from the bag, she noticed the incoming transmission wasn't from their usual contact. "Identify," Luna insisted. "Reclaimer Special Corrections Officer Sanis Marwen. Identify. Luna Aleph, exile. You are with your associate?" Rogue rolled her eyes before stating flatly, "Rogue Savannah, exile." Before he could reply, Rogue put her hand over the datapad and mouthed to Luna, "What does Specor want with us? They don't hire assassins." "Miss Aleph," the datapad mumbled. Rogue pulled her hand away, allowing Luna to continue. "Sorry, Officer Marwen. Technical difficulties. How can we help?" "I'm sure," he replied coldly. "You are hereby ordered by the Reclaimer High Council to turn yourselves into the nearest fleet vessel for termination." Rogue almost exploded and spat at the datapad with fury. "On what grounds?" Luna hurried to calm her friend down. Other patrons of the CAF were becoming uneasy. "On the grounds, Miss Savannah, that you and your associate murdered a high-ranking official within the Archaean industrial world." Rogue began seething through her teeth, but made sure to keep her voice low. "We're assassins! We were given a target by our contact, and we fulfilled it." "Then would you be so kind as to explain this?" The voice wavelength that represented Sanis minimised to allow for a video clip to play. An official-looking business person began speaking to a crowd of people who had gathered at the steps to the complex the pair had been at just a few hours prior. "It's a terrible tragedy to think that this kind of thing goes on while we sleep." "Rogue," Luna started with shock in her eyes. "I don't believe it," she replied aghast. "That's our mark! By the 5, we killed a fucking decoy!" "So, as you can see, you must be brought to account for your actions. We simply cannot have assassins running around murdering people under the guise of a justified job." "We didn't know," Luna insisted. "You will turn yourselves into the nearest Reclaimer fleet and await judgment. If the Fleet Master deems it suitable, he will hold a trial where you will be able to put your point across." Rogue grabbed the datapad. "And what if we don't turn ourselves in? Then what?" "You will be marked as wanted and hunted down by Reclaimer Special Forces until you can be brought to justice. Please try to remember that fleeing is an admission of guilt." "We'll have to sleep on it. Bye." Without a second's hesitation, Rogue closed the datapad and threw it back at Luna. "Now what?" "What choice do we have? You heard him. If we don't turn ourselves in, then we'll just be hunted down for the rest of our lives." "We can outrun anything the Council can throw at us," Rogue replied with an air of smugness. "We haven't even got a ship." "But we've got the funds to buy one, right?" "Not the kind of ship you're thinking of. We'd be lucky to get a frigate, let alone the fuel or crew to pilot the damn thing." "I'm not turning myself over for an unfair trial at the hands of some oversized fleet master. We're running, Loon. I don't care what you say." "And what about our Reclaimer honour?" "Will you listen to yourself? It's pathetic. They abandoned us, remember? Exiled because of that shit on Raic. The only honour we owe anyone is to ourselves, and I'm pretty sure that it doesn't involve laying down and dying because of a mistake." "Well, you know as well as I do that we can't split up, so I guess I'm stuck running with you." Luna looked down at her empty paper cup and sighed. Just when things looked to be going so well. We don't have time to hang around anymore. We should buy ourselves a new data pad and ditch the old one to make it harder for them to find us. Then we need to find ourselves a ship. I've told you already, we can't afford one. Not to buy, to work on. I can pilot and you're a pretty good medic. Besides, we're both good with weapons. What captain could turn us down? Quite a few, I imagine, especially once they find out our backgrounds. Look, I'm not discussing this anymore. We need to find a pad, then we need to find a way off this rock. The more time we sit here, the closer our fellow hunters get. Luna sighed and reluctantly nodded in agreement. Fine. Ro got to her feet and pulled her carryall up. She helped Luna with hers before they made their way through the station towards an electronics shop. End of chapter 1. So, yeah, there you go, guys. That was Split Personality, chapter 1. It's a work in progress at the moment, but, yeah, I just thought you'd like to hear the first chapter. So, yeah, this book should be available in the next couple of months at the Troubled Core website, troubledcore.com. And yeah, thank you very much for listening, guys. It's been a pleasure as always, and I hope to catch you next time. Thank you very much. Bye bye.